I did want to talk to you a little bit about, you running for Senate because, I know that you're someone who wants to get big things done. When you ran for governor, you ran on a plan for Medicare for all in Michigan. And I remember you would use the hashtag done waiting, in your social media posts. And so, well, governors can take executive actions, even if the legislature, won't act on some of their bills. The Senate really is not known for moving quickly on anything.
Right.
It's full of Chuck Schubers and Dick Durbins, even though Durbin is not running for reelection. So, how would you change things in the Senate so that you could get more done? Is it time for Schumer to go? Would you kill the filibuster? What else would you want to do?
So I'll tell you this, I think the filibuster has has never been the shining example of democracy in action. I think it has been used throughout history to choke out options and opportunities for more progressive legislation. I also think it's fundamentally anti-democratic because it puts a stopper on the ability of the democratic process to distinguish and identify those who are for legislation and those who are against, right? When you have a filibuster process, the folks who disagree with certain legislation can just hide behind the filibuster. And so you don't get a situation where they have to be accountable to the people. Now,
Right.
I understand that a lot of folks would say, well, Abdul, they've got a Republican trifecta, right? And don't you think that if they're but for the filibuster, we'd be saying far worse out of the Senate? I would say yes, but at least we'd be transparent about who stood where, and then
Mm.
we would allow the democratic process to work itself out. You don't like what that senator voted for, make sure that you vote them out next time. And I think that over time, more democracy is always better. As far as leadership goes, look, I know what I'm running to do, and I will support whoever it is that gives us the best chance at passing and driving that legislation. So a lot of folks focus on current leader Schumer, and I'd say
Mhm.
really to me depends on right what the options are. So anybody who
Mhm.
tells you that I'm decidedly going to vote against one person is not thinking through the potential where the other person who's up for leadership may actually be worse on the issues that you want to advance. And so I'm just not
Who,
going to
who would
hamstring
be
myself that way.
worse?
Fetterman, right? If it was a Schumer versus a Fetterman, I'm making my choice there. So when I think about folks that I'm really excited about, I think about Van Hollen, right?
Mm.
And how excited I'd be there. Or Bernie Sanders. I mean, I don't know that he's interested in the role, but I'm looking for whichever leader shows me that they have both the heart and the mind to be able to achieve the set of goals that I have for Michigan and our country, the goals that I'm running on here. The other part of this that I just think is important to remember is that change doesn't happen all at once.
Mhm.
And as much as we're done waiting, I think the work of persuading folks, right? Maybe this is just me getting older, right? This is 40-year-old Abdul with two kids and a mortgage rather than 32-year-old Abdul from the basement of his in-laws home. I understand that persuasion is absolutely critical in the democratic process, and persuasion takes time. And one of the most important things that a senator can do is to be a explainer for the public policy that he believes or she believes is in the best interest of the communities that they serve. And one of the things I hope I can do, right, as somebody who has spent a lot of time studying and writing on and talking on public policy, is to have that conversation with the American public, is to move the thinking around what we can do to make our lives that much better, right? It shouldn't be this hard to afford your groceries. It shouldn't be this hard to go see a doctor without worrying about debt. It shouldn't be this hard to believe that the job you have today will be the job you have tomorrow and that you can afford your life. It shouldn't be this hard to buy a house if you're like under the age of 40. And it doesn't have to be. And I think
Mhm.
having that conversation with folks and building the public discussion and the public opinion around moving legislation is part of the job. And that's
Mhm.
why I kind of love the fact that this is a 6-year term because it does take time.
Right.
But it also takes all of us who believe in these policies working to have that conversation with public. And it's a space where I think I could excel as a senator.
Yeah. During the last election, we saw that there were a lot of voters who were very alienated on the left, right, independent voters. And definitely there were plenty of people who wanted the system burned to the ground. But with Trump hollowing out everything from the State Department to the Department of Education and killing USAID, life saving scientific research. This is really leaving massive gaps where real work was getting done. So, on day one of your term in the US Senate, how would you deal with all of this that Trump and DOGE and Elon have created? And what would be your top legislative priorities?
So forgive me a medical analogy here is you got to stop the bleeding, right? And then you've got to identify the source, and then you've got to do the repair. And I think I hope that I'll get elected in a wave election where we will take back both the House and the Senate. And I understand that all the prognosticators think that's really difficult, but I also see what's in front of me. I see where people are, and I recognize that the degree of anger and frustration, the recognition that this is not the America that you want to raise your kids in, I think is going to deliver a real wave election. And so how I hope I get elected with a number of folks who are interested in stopping that bleeding. And I think having control of the House and Senate, the amount of oversight that you can do is absolutely critical. So that oversight, I think, comes as number one. I hope that obviously the committee that I'm probably best suited for is health, education, labor, and pensions help. And I think starting to right size and rebuild from what RFK and Doge and Elon Musk have done and are doing, I think is critical.
Mhm.
There's a couple of, from a legislative standpoint, a couple of pieces of legislation that I really believe in. It's not one or two, it's more like three or four. The first is we got to get right on the corrupting role of money in politics, standing up against Citizens United. And although I understand that the precedents set by this court to interpret the 14th Amendment
Mhm.
as calling a corporation a person and the First Amendment is calling their money speech,
Mhm.
are problematic, and that this court is unlikely to overturn those precedents. I think we've got to try. And I think that starts with legislation that forces them to confront those ideas because of, frankly, how politically problematic they've become and how they've corrupted our politics. Number two, obviously, I literally wrote the book on Medicare for All. I believe deeply that we need to drive it. And I understand that we probably don't have the numbers of votes, but I want to have the conversation with the American public to drive their elected officials to start talking about the fact that right now our health insurance system is unsustainable. We pay more than any other high income country in the world for worse care. We have some of the longest waiting lines in the world. We don't want to believe it, but if you need to see a cardiologist, the average wait time to see a cardiologist, and by the way, nobody has a cardiology visit that is just like, well, get to it when you need to get to it. When you
Mhm.
need to see a cardiologist, you need to see your cardiologist 2.5 months to see a cardiologist. And so I think that is a second huge priority. Third, it is too hard to form and to join a union. I believe deeply in the PRO Act, and it is something that I would want to champion from day one, which opens up and expands and union rights in this country. I think we need to start thinking about unionization in other sectors. Specifically as someone who went to medical school, I think doctors need to start unionizing more often now.
Mm.
Doctors are not they're not working for other doctors in the sort of guild model in the past. They work for large health systems that have been consolidating in ways that suppress their wages and leave them in situations where they just cannot provide adequate medical care. I'd love to see physicians unionize, and I'd love to be able to empower that in the legislature.
Do you think
Uh,
that
and s-
that would help with trying to get more people into family practice, general practice? Because obviously there's a lot more money in specialties like plastic surgery, for instance.
yeah, no, I think what would really help on that front is Medicare for all. I do think unionization would probably help too. To get to that question, the reason that that happens is because the AMA, which still claims to speak on behalf of physicians, but increasingly does not, given its representation, is they have a role in helping to shape reimbursement rates across specialties, and they are disproportionately empowering specialists, right? So the
Mhm.
plastic surgeries, the orthopedic surgeries, et cetera, the plastic surgeons, orthopedic surgeons, et cetera, into positions where they have a disproportionate impact on reimbursement rates. So reimbursement for specialists is substantially higher than it is for family practice. But we know that in our healthcare system, you would much rather be in a situation where you didn't need a surgery in the first place, right? Because you got your problem taken care of in primary care rather
Mhm.
than having to wait to actually get the surgery. And so I think we need to right size that. And I think under Medicare for All, you can start to really rethink reimbursement schedules, and you can uproot the way that the AMA has instantiated itself in the system to the benefit of specialists over primary care providers. But I really appreciate that point.